Wayside. This is Situation Room. I read from the AP Bulletin. Kennedy apparently shot in head. He fell face down in back seat of his car. Blood was on his head. Mrs. Kennedy cried, "Oh no," and tried to hold up his head.
This has been a long, sad weekend. The silent crowds are gone, the muffled drums are stilled, and the wheels of government begin to grind again. I think everyone, as long as he lives, will have indelibly stamped upon his memory the exact time and place he happened to be when the news came. I happened to be, of all places, in the supermarket. The loudspeaker was blaring the word that the president had been shot as I walked in the door. Everyone was standing as if frozen to the spot, disbelief and horror on their faces. Barbara Castine, handwritten letter. Hyattsville, Maryland, November 27th, 1963.
The Kennedy Library has thousands and thousands of these letters. Originally, there were 1.25 million letters. Now there are around 230,000, 250,000. Luckily, a lot of them are classified in specific categories. I probably looked at something like 10 to 15,000. There are boxes and boxes of letters that are unprocessed, especially from the foreign mail. I had a sense of what I might be beginning to look at, but in order to publish them, I had to get permission from the authors or the heirs to the author. And so that involved a lot of detective work. I had some friends who helped me, my wife helped me. Unless they're in the public domain, of which there were some, because some were government officials. This writing here, that's George McGovern's writing, and it was from the letter that he wrote. He really was close to Kennedy. It's hard to make a very final decision when you're there, but you're going through them, and first of all you develop a methodology for like what you think is likely to be good or not. One of the best letters I have is by a woman named Sandy Jones. It was about how her great-grandfather had planted something that they called now the Lincoln spruce.
Dear Mrs. Kennedy, over on the next hill about a mile away there is a monstrous Norway spruce planted on the day of Mr. Lincoln's death. It is the one remaining tree of 12 that a man planted there 100 years ago. On that black day last November, I asked my father for 2 blue spruce to plant in memory of your wonderful husband. Dad gave them to me and I planted them, and they lived through their first winter and are growing fine. They are only about 1 foot tall now, but I certainly hope they will grow forever, because your husband did not save America. He saved the world from being blown to bits.
I think they stand for the just extreme distress that this event caused in the psyche of the nation and the world. I think you have to have a sense of what John F. Kennedy had come to stand for, being the youngest president ever elected to office. This sense of the free world, of youthful vigor, and of coming to it with some new ideas and an attempt to really also reform the United States system, including civil rights. It was like we finally had gotten to something, especially people who were civil rights activists and socially minded people were just totally distressed. Jackie Kennedy came to embody a certain kind of dignity, and she handled herself in a way that was seen around the world as exemplary. What a distinguished woman would do. She arranged the funerals. There were leaders from all over the world who came. Immediately, she interceded in granting a few interviews, talking about Camelot, talking about what her husband stood for. So she was in a way also trying to set the record and set the way that he would be interpreted, and what was, that he had this dream. She presented him very idealistically, and which, he was in many ways. He was also a very tough politician in other ways. So
this U.S. space capital, the president has a long chat with Walter M. Schirra, Center, our next man in space, who is scheduled for a 6-orbit flight.
She was perfect because, unlike somebody like Eleanor Roosevelt, Eleanor very much had an independent political identity. Jackie was apolitical in her basic identity. Her basic interest was aesthetic. She was really interested in the arts, and she loved to read. She was able to bring in a whole different range of society. And what's so interesting about these letters is because they're letters not just from political people, not just from Hollywood stars, but there are, letters from Igor Stravinsky, letters from fine composers, letters from Nobel Prize people, letters from designers, letters from artists, letters from ballet stars. And a lot of these people are people that really had close connections with Jackie and not so much with Jack. This is a letter from Robin Douglas Home, who was a jazz pianist, journalist, and a biographer of Frank Sinatra, who had spent time at the Kennedys' new country house on Rattlesnake Mountain in Virginia. Robin Douglas Home, handwritten letter, 3 December 63. My dear Jackie, I have not written before this on purpose, for obvious reasons. I could only send out thought waves to you through the atmosphere and hope you received them. You know what I would have said in those thought waves, and it is better to leave them as thoughts, unspoken and unwritten. For to speak or to write them would be superfluous and serve only to devalue them and the emotion they would try to describe. Everything you said that evening at Rattlesnake kept coming back to me. I remember mainly you saying, don't ever get bitter. Now it sounds so ironic coming from you who have so much you could be bitter about, to me who has, by comparison, nothing. But one thing I know, that it will never be necessary for anyone to say those words to you. I am prouder than ever to know you as I do, and to feel about you as I do. You are someone very special. You have always been special to me. Now you are special in the eyes of the world. I only wish that the world could have remained blind, and that the tragedy could have turned into the nightmarish dream I still want to wake up and find it really was. Love, Robin. One of the interesting parts of the condolence mail is that it wasn't just letters or cards. There were also mass cards. There were also a lot of pieces of art. There were collections of condolence books. There were brochures. There were every sort of different thing. And one thing that was several boxes that were also there included pieces of music. Usually they were lyrics to recognizable tunes or rewritings of tunes, and often they were. Some of them were interesting, but often they were very maudlin and not particularly memorable. But I noticed at one point going through that there was one piece of music that stood out for its calligraphic handwriting, almost calligraphy, from a 16-year-old boy. I thought this would be very nice to include. Also, the music looks good, so I took a scan of it. When I got home, I also tried to play it a little bit, and I rather liked the tune. When I located him, I discovered he had become a professional musician, a composer, a luthier who made violins and guitars. He had played in certain rock bands in major acts. And I got in touch with him and said, had he ever recorded that piece of music? And he actually said he hadn't. He had forgotten about it. But he'd be willing to give it a try. So he went and he recorded the music, composed by him when he was 16 years old, and played by him now that he is 63 years old. And that's the music you hear here.